So again, today we're talking about UIDatePicker, Unwind, Segue. So far, this is the UI we've set up, right? We have two view controllers controlled by a navigation controller. So our first view controller, we have a text field, we have a UIDatePicker, we have a button, and we have a label. Our second view controller, we have three labels, a UI switch, and a button. Okay. Let's go ahead and connect our create event button. Let's make a segue between our first view controller and our second view controller. Again, a segue is a visual transition between A and B, between view controller 1 moving over to view controller 2, right? How does that happen? When I click on create event, it pushes a new view onto the stack. When I say stack, think of a stack of pancakes, right? We begin by having pancake number 1, which is create event. We push a new view. When we say we push, we segue. So when I click on create event, it pushes a new pancake. It pushes this new view controller onto the stack. So this particular view goes over our create event. Everybody with me? So currently we have 2 pancakes. When our program launches, it has 1 pancake. When I click on create event, a new pancake gets pushed onto my first pancake. When I click on the back button, which we'll have here, it's going to remove 1 pancake, which is called popping, okay? When you click on the back button, it pops the view out of the stack. Everybody with me? So this is called a navigation stack. The navigation stack will have 2 view controllers. The first view controller will be this create event view controller. The second one will be the event controller or the detail controller. Go ahead, Matt.
Can that get problematic? Because, like, let's say you have 8 pancakes.
That you have a what?
Like, let's say you have too many pancakes.
The best practice is to have at most 3 pancakes.
Okay.
Everybody? Best practice is to have 3 pancakes. We're not too greedy, right? If we have 8 pancakes, figure you have 8 views you have to go through. This is bad. Right? This is very, very bad. So you need to rethink your view hierarchy. Apple talks about rethinking your view hierarchy. Let's actually see, 1 second. Let's see. It's in the Human Interface Guideline. Again, this is the Bible of design. Human Interface. And we have that bookmark, right? Yes, we do. I said to bookmark it 2 days ago when we spoke about size classes. Actually, last week. So here we have the Human Interface Guideline. I'll slack it out again. And we'll bookmark it, right? Because we love to bookmark. Right, Mr. Eric? I love to bookmark. You don't, right? That's not going to help you. Yeah, but now you have no context for what you added. Muscle memory. You added it yourself. You'll remember it later. All right, so here we have the Human Interface Guideline. Again, this is Apple's documentation for design guidelines, right? This is Apple's documentation for design guidelines. Let's see, navigation might be the headline we're looking for. There we go. Everybody has the link I sent out. Do we see app architecture? The link I sent out on Slack. Make sure you bookmark it, right? Again, it's HIG, H-I-G, HIG for short, or Human Interface Guidelines. Here they're talking about navigation, how navigation should be, right? You see here we have 3 levels of navigation. Here we have a flat navigation. So think of a flat navigation like a tab bar controller. Everybody? Flat meaning I have 4 tabs. I'm not going 5 levels deep anywhere. This has 4 tabs, so think of Instagram. I click on my home button, I see my home feed. I click on my profile, I see my profile. I click on create Instagram post, I get Instagram post, right? I'm not going 5 levels deep, right? And here, this is content driven. This is a different hierarchy here, right? Where the user clicks on one thing, it goes to something else. Again, it's not going 5 levels deep, it's going back and forth, right? So your question was, should we have 8 levels? No, this is bad. This is bad. This is a bad zone. Like, think of having 8 levels like the pyramid of doom with your if-else statements. where you go like 5 levels deep inside of an if statement or for loop. Think of algorithms. Think of as you go deeper in there, the algorithm of that becomes very bad and very slow. And the user is going to really quickly delete your application because it will become very annoying. Like, how do I go back to the root controller after I've gotten 8 levels deep, right? I'm lost. Cool? Everybody got smart question, right? So best practice, get to 3 levels. This first pancake pushes the second pancake, pushes the third pancake. At that point, you want to stop pushing pancakes. Think of a different higher architecture. Part of it, as we start building our own applications, we need to start thinking, what does our application look like? What does the view hierarchy look like, right? Am I using a tab controller? Am I using a navigation controller, right? Cool? Great, great, great. Let us keep going. So here we'll control drag from the create event, control drag from the create event over to the view controller, control drag from the create event over to the view controller. Okay, and we're selecting show segue. We're selecting show segue. Show segue. Great. At this point, let's run our application and test it out. Does it actually get pushed onto the stack? So the first time our application runs, we have one pancake or we have one view on the stack, one view. So I run my application. Here I have one view. There's nothing to pop. There's no back button. Everybody with me? There's no back button here. We only have one pancake. If I click on the create event, a new view gets pushed onto my stack. Very important. A new view gets pushed onto my stack. Currently, I have 2 views onto the stack. I have 2 views now on the stack. If I want to go back to my previous view, I click on the back button. The back button pops that view from the stack. It pops. It gets rid of it. So click on the back button for create event. It pops the view from the stack. And we get this slide animation. Right? We don't have to do that ourselves. We get that for free with the navigation controller. Mel, what's your question?
No, it's just all my boxes are highlighted. Create event,
Does it segue correctly in your application?
it looks like it is.
Okay. That might just be an interface, a canvas bug, where you navigate out of your storyboard and go back to it if you see everything is highlighted. That happens to me. Sometimes I have to close Xcode, reopen it. But your app functions correctly, correct? All right, very good. So far, the only thing we're doing is navigating from view controller 1 to view controller 2. Our objective is, as we select a date, right? We select a date here. We add some event here. Well, first of all, we have a bug here. We can get access to, if our keyboard comes up, we need to fix that. So let's fix that. Because when we click on the return button, we want the keyboard to disappear or to dismiss, right? So there's a bunch of outlets and issues we need to fix. All right. So let's get the assistant editor opened for the view, the first view controller. Click on my first view controller, go to the assistant editor and bring that up so we could actually start editing code. Okay, great. The first thing I want to do is I want to rename where it says view controller here, I want to rename this. Will I just edit it? Will I just say edit this like this way? No, bad. What am I going to do? Refactor. So I will right click on where it says view controller here, where it says class view controller. I'll right click on it. Antonio? I'll right click on where it says view controller here. I'll go to refactor and rename. I'll go to refactor, rename. Mel. I'll go to refactor, rename. Yeah, we only have one view controller right now. So refactor, rename, I'll edit. Let Xcode bring up all the edit panes first before you edit, right? So I'll edit where it says view controller. View controller will be called create event view controller. I'll press enter when I'm ready. So the name is called create event view controller. I'll press enter. I'll run my application again to make sure I have no errors because we just refactored. Great, my app still runs, everything is good, great. So now let's go ahead and connect outlets. For now, we'll say we have our label. Actually, let me drag the text field first. The text field we'll call event text field. So again, where do we put our outlets? Do we put it below the UIDLoad? No, we put it above UIDLoad. So here, this is where our outlets go. Outlets and properties. I'll control drag my text field over to my view controller. I'll name my text field event text field. The text field, the first element at the top. So the text field, control drag the text field and call it create text field. Oh, sorry, event text field. I'll press connect. Right, so we have event text field. Let me get some more space here. Again, on our small laptops, let's really try to maximize space. Like whatever you do not need, close. Like for example, we do not need our navigation area right now, so I'll close it. Right, so get more space here so we see more code. All right, so I have my text field. Next, I'll drag my date picker, my UI date picker. I'll control drag, and I'll call it date picker. Date picker, right? I control drag the date picker object over to my view controller. I connected it. Next, we'll drag the button. Control drag the button over, and we'll call the button create event button. I heard, is there a question? Okay, next we'll have, how many do we have so far? 4. The label is the last one. So control drag the RSVP no label here. So control drag our label, and we'll simply call it RSVP label. Great, so here we have 4 ID outlets. Right, we have a text field, date picker, UI button, and a UI label. This is our view controller lifecycle methods. View controller lifecycle methods. Below here, we will have, yes? Because we want to change the label or the name of the button. At some point, we want to change create event to something else in code. So if we want to change it in code, we need an outlet to it. So Yulia's question is, in what scenario do we need both the action and the outlet for a button? If you want to change an attribute on the button, you need an outlet to it. If you do not need to change any attributes on the button, like the color, the title label, you do not need the outlet. If you only need the action, that's fine. Cool? Great. Very good questions. So here we have actions and methods. I will drag an action from my date picker. For my date picker, I'll control drag from my date picker. For my date picker, I'll control drag. For the type, it will be a UIDatePicker because we want to know when we change the date picker. Everybody, date picker doesn't have a delegate. It's a control. It's an action. Very similar to a button. If the user clicks on your button, in our case, if the user changes the date, we want to get information that the user changed the date. So here, our date picker is an action here, and I'll simply call it date picker changed. Date picker changed, and I'll click on connect. So date picker changed for the date picker. That's the name of it. It's a type UIDatePicker. And we're listening to value change. Where the value change, that's when we get an update. And I click on connect. Great, great, great. Okay, so Cassandra earlier said to get rid of the keyboard, we need to conform to UI text field delegate. Any questions about that? Right? Because when the keyboard comes up in our example here, if I edit my text field, there's no way for me to get rid of the keyboard. Right now, I don't have access to my submit button at the bottom. How do we fix that, right? Yes, sir. So we could use an extension to separate the code logic. That's why we use it, to not have all the delegate methods in the class itself. So we separate it up because you could have multiple extensions or multiple protocols that you conform to in your view controller. For readability and for code style, we use an extension for it. The extension itself extends the view controller class. We'll see how that's used more, where we want to extend functionality of a view or of a class, and we use an extension for that. Next question. Refer to that particular delegate. Yeah, very good. So Tiffany's question was, in the extension, only have delegate methods for the UI text field delegate. Do not have extra methods in there. It should only be based on UI text field delegate functions. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So here, we'll use an extension on our create event view controller. We conform into, not inheriting, this is not inheriting, this is conforming to UI text field delegate. So we're conforming to UI text field delegate. What's the difference between UI text field delegate and UI table view delegate? I mean, not delegate, UI table view data source. So far, what's the differences that we see? What's the differences between required methods between UI text field delegate and UI table view data source? Right, so Amini is saying with table view, we're required to implement two of those methods, right? Here, all the methods are optional, like we said before, right? All the methods are optional. There's no required methods for that particular protocol. It's up to us to implement which ones we need. But a table view, it needs a data source. It needs those two methods. It needs self-row, it needs, what's the next one? Self-row and? Number of rows. Self-row and number of rows. Great. So here we only need to implement for now. We'll start typing in text field. As you start typing in text field, all the methods come up. All the methods on that particular delegate comes up, right? Which ones do we want? Which ones are we looking for? Should return. Tanya, which method do we need? Should return. Should return gets called when? Right, everybody? Right, Stephanie? So should return gets called when the user clicks on the return key on my keyboard. That method gets called. And in that method, why do I want it to get called? Why am I implementing it?
Because you want to hit the return button, you want the keyboard to
Right. So I want to dismiss the keyboard. When the user clicks return, this is why I do it. This is why I'm implementing this particular method. And here, what are we typing in to dismiss the keyboard? Oscar, what am I typing in to dismiss the keyboard? What do I type in before resign first responder? Text field. So Oscar is saying text field dot resign first responder, right? Yes? And here we return true. Cool? This is all we need to implement for now. What else are we missing? Is my code going to work? Will my text field, will my keyboard get dismissed? Yes, right? It will. Let's run it and test it. So we all agree that the keyboard will get dismissed, right? All of us go ahead and put a breakpoint. Put a breakpoint at line 37. It might not be 37 for you, but put a breakpoint at the return true statement. Everybody? Bring up your keyboard. Bring up your keyboard. When you click on return, does it dismiss? No. Why doesn't it dismiss, Matt? Matt, why doesn't the keyboard dismiss? Right? So Matt is saying we need to set ourselves as the delegate for the text field. Everybody? Without doing that, the delegate is nil. Everybody? If I do not set myself, the view controller, if I do not set our view controller as the delegate, it's never going to get called because the delegate is nil. Text field.delegate is nil. Right? Let's see what I'm talking about. If I put a breakpoint, let's go ahead and put a breakpoint in the view load. Put a breakpoint in your view load. Put a breakpoint in your view load. Run your application. Run your application. At this point, our breakpoint has gotten activated, correct? In my console window, I'll simply type in PO for printout. I'll type in PO, followed by the name of our text field is what? Event text field dot delegate, and press enter. Look at the value. Do we see the value? It's nil, meaning it's not set. We haven't explicitly set the object. We haven't explicitly said the delegate has a value, right? We need to say event text field dot delegate equal to self. We need to set ourselves as the delegate, as the one listening for changes on the text field. Everybody with me? All right, so let's go ahead and do that. You could click on continue to go through your code here. My continue button on my breakpoint is right here. I could click on it. It will continue executing the program. I'll remove the breakpoint by clicking on it and dragging it out. Click on the breakpoint, drag it out. That removes it. Okay, so in our view load, we need to set this view controller as the delegate object for the text field, for the event text field. Cool? And here, what do? We say event text field dot delegate. What does it get assigned to? Self. And self is what? What is self? The view controller instance. Self is this view controller instance. Yes, I could have 8 text fields in here. Very good. All right, so here we run our code again. Which one? Event text field. Oh no, I'll refactor that. Refactor it. And then spell it correctly. This is spelled wrong. So here, if we go to our app, and I click on my text field, my keyboard comes up. If I click on return, it should dismiss it. Does it dismiss it for everybody? Excellent. So we have a small typo here. Thank you, Mel. So again, if I want to fix my typo because I spelled field wrong, do I edit it by doing this? No, I don't. What do? I refactor. I right-click on what I want to edit. I refactor. I rename. I let Xcode come up first. First let Xcode bring up your edit window before you edit. And now we could edit our field. Press enter. Great. It edits it everywhere. So now we have text field correctly spelled. Great. Let's keep going here. So we have our delegate. All that is good. Let's run the app again. The next step, we'll pass data from view controller 1 to view controller 2. We'll pass data from view controller 1 to view controller 2 like we did a couple days ago. So what happens is when I type in some event name like demo, and I press return, and I press create event, I want to pass in demo here, so this event title gets changed. So this is going to be demo here. So we want to change the title. Everybody with me? So I want to get data from view controller A to view controller B. So let's go ahead and do that. Go back to your navigation window. Go back to your navigation window. We need to create a new view controller. We'll create a new view controller. We'll Command N, and create a CocoaTouch class. Command N, create a CocoaTouch class. Click on Next. Where it says View Controller here, add in Detail View Controller. Detail View Controller. Press Next. Press Create. So this is what we have. We have our newly created class called Detail View Controller. We'll remove any boilerplate code that we do not need. Cool. And here we need object. We need object from source view controller. Source view controller in that case is our create event view controller. So we need object, we need an event. In that case, we need an event. So here we need to create a new. We need to create a new file. We need a model. So we need a model. We'll create a new file. It's going to be an event. So we need an event from the source view controller, right? Because the event will get passed from view controller 1 to view controller 2. Let's go ahead and create a new file again. The source is the create event view controller. So Command N. This time we're creating a Swift file. Everybody? It's a Swift file, not a CocoaTouch file. It's a Swift file. When you're creating a model, in our case, we're creating a model. We want to create an event. It's just a basic Swift file, basic foundation. Swift file, click Next. And for the file name, I simply call it event. For my file name, I simply call it event. An event is going to be the model in our MVC. The M there is the model. The model is our event. That's the data. So event, I click on create. I go to my event object. It's going to be a struct called event. Our event will have 3 basic properties. We could have more properties on our event. But for now, we'll only have a name, which is a string. We'll have a Boolean value. And we'll have a date object. So here, this is the first time we've seen a date object, right? A date object here will signify the property on our date picker. Date is the date of today. Date is a class, right? Date is a class that represents an instance in time. Everybody? So date here represents, well, the date class is a data type that represents an instance, a point in time. So this is the date class. If we option click on the date class, let's see what we have here. So a date value encapsulates a single point in time, right? As we know, date is a date. Date has a time, right? And date has the actual month, calendar, day of the year. Okay? So that's what a date is. It's a struct, sorry, not a class. That's coming from, I'm thinking NS date, sorry, it's a struct. Clarification here. It's not a class, it's a struct. So the date object is a struct that represents a point in time. Cool? Great. Great, great, great. Let's continue on. So we have our event. This is great. We could go back to our detail. Everybody's done with their event struct. Let's go back to our detail view controller. And here we need an event, right? We need an event object. So here we'll say var event, well, event, lowercase, event type, optional. What is the value of this event here? Default value is what? What is the default value of event? Yes, Tiffany. This actual event here, what's the value of it now? With the optional, it's nil, right, everybody? So here, remember we're in a class, we have, if I do not specify some value, I'll get an error. Because I'm in a class, I need to initialize my values, right? So here, if I do not initialize event, I'll get an error saying class detail view has no initializers. Remember back in unit 1, right? In a class, we have to initialize our values. So here, I initialize it to nil by using an optional. We could use optional, implicit optional, or we could use optional unwrapping here. We did implicit a couple days ago. Today, we'll do explicit optional, where we have to unwrap it. Everybody with me? Right? This is best practice, especially because you might have a crash and you don't know where the crash is coming from. If we use optional unwrapping, we'll use optional unwrapping to set up our UI. If something goes wrong, we'll use a fatal error, which we haven't seen either, to give us a message, like what happened? Why did it crash? With implicit, if I do this, it just crashes, and I need to use breakpoints to figure out what crashed, why. Everybody, we'll see more context of what that looks like. But for now, use the question mark here, and we'll come back to it. All right, so here we have an event. We need to go to prepare for Segue to pass that object. So let's go to our create event view controller. So far we have our view controller lifecycles. We have our action methods here. Let's go ahead and get our prepare for Segue. In the prepare for Segue. In prepare for Segue, we'll populate it with whatever the calendar, with whatever date the user selected and whatever text field the user put in. All right, remember we spoke about prepare for Segue. This is a very, very important topic, right? Part of our assessment is to know how to implement prepare for Segue. So in prepare for Segue is where that method gets called when I click on my create event button. When I click on create event button, prepare for Segue gets called. We showed that a couple days ago. I'll show it again for us to know how that method gets called. When I click on create event, prepare for Segue gets called. That's where I want to pass my data. That's where I want to pass my data from A to B. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So start typing in prepare for Segue right after your view did load. Right after your view did load, type in prepare for Segue. Type in prepare for Segue and press enter. We'll revisit the same thing we did a couple days ago. We'll put a print statement again. And in here, we'll say prepare for Segue. Right? When we've typed that in, we'll run our app again. We'll run our app again. At this point, if you click on Create Event, Prepare for Segue should get printed in your console. Oscar, does it get printed? When you go back to your first view controller and you go back to your second, does it get printed again? You go back to your first view controller, click on the back button, click on Create Event again. It should get printed again, right? So here, this is what's happening. When we click on Create Event, Prepare for Segue gets called. This function gets called. Prepare for Segue gets called every time I make a transition from A to B. When I go back to A and I click on my Create Event again, Prepare for Segue gets called again. So whenever I transition from View Controller A to View Controller B, Prepare for Segue gets called. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, so here is where we want to set up our data. So here is where we want to set up and pass the event data to the detail view controller. Any questions about that statement? Any questions about that particular statement? Yes? Right now, it doesn't do anything. We need to write code to pass event to our detail view controller. Right? We need an event. First of all, we need an event object here. Let's get an event object. What's your question, sir? Eric, you had something saying? Yes, we have to use destination, exactly, like we did a couple days ago. We have to get the destination, we have to use typecasting to cast it to that particular type we expect. Very good. Excelente, senor. So let's keep going here. We'll have an event. Let's create an event here of type event. I'm above the view load. I'm above the view load in my create event view controller. I'm above the view load, yes. Not in the create event. We do not have any variable in the create event. Yes, different view controllers. Missed your question. Different view controllers, you could use the same variable name. Everybody heard Tiffany's question? There are different view controllers. All right, so here we have an event of type event. Again, we need to explicitly initialize it here. Right here, I'm using implicit unwrapping. I'll use a did set computed property. So when my event gets changed, I update my UI. Here, I want to update some UI whenever this sets. Update UI. Update UI whenever the event changes. And again, did set is a property observer. Gets called when the property changes. Cool. So here I want to update my UI. I want to update the user interface. I want to update the view, right? So what do I want to do? If event dot will attend, if the user will attend the event, I want to update the UI based on what that is. else I want to update the UI differently. So based on the action, if the user does it in the event, I want to update my label, my RSVP label, and I want to update my create event button. Julia, here I want to update the button title itself based on if the user is going to the event or not. So I want to update both the button and the label. That's why I got access to the outlet. Cool? So here we'll update label and button. All right. So first off, I'll say RSVP label dot text. The RSVP label, right, is RSVP no, yes. RSVP label dot text. If they're going to the event, RSVP yes. If they're not going to the event, RSVP label dot text equal to RSVP no. We'll also update the button. We'll say create event button. On the button, we use dot set title label. That's what we're after. So set title label, or just set title, sorry. The title will be view event. So they added the event, so we'll just view the event if they are going. For the state normal. If they're not going to the event, we'll have a different message on the button. Set title for normal. We'll have a different label. We'll say RSVP to event. Yeah.
This is changing the title of the button.
Yes.
Why is the RSVP?
We'll be toggling back and forth. So if we change the button to view event, meaning they are going to the event, so just view the event you're going to. If you haven't RSVP, or if you said no, we just change it to RSVP to event. It's up to you what you want to write in there. Basically, RSVP to event, meaning you said no, maybe, or are you sure? We're just toggling back and forth between yes and no here. So this changes our label here. Let's go back to our UI. This changes, our default is RSVP no, right? If the user is going, this is going to be RSVP yes. Cool. All right, let's continue on here. Good. Are we done typing? No problem, let's keep going. While we're typing, I could edit the view did load with some more information. We need to set our default event because right now we don't have, our event is nil here. So as the view comes on screen for the first time, we'll say event equal to event. For the name, we'll simply say event name not set. Will attend, will set the default to false. And the date, pay attention here. Date, this date here is that exact date right now. So every time we run the app, the date time changes. This is the date initializer. Date, open parens, close parens. Date, object, open parens, close parens, creates a new date object. So date, open parens, close parens, creates or initializes or instantiates a new date object with the current date and time. So this is what this does. That syntax here, current date and time, right? It's November 14th at 12:16. Every time you run it, the time changes, right? So this if you run it again, it's like 12:17, 12:18, whatever it is. Whatever the current time is when you run the application, that's the current time. Okay? And I spoke about being able to edit, configure the date picker. I spoke about being able to configure the date picker in code, right? Earlier when we introduced the date picker, right? So here we'll have a minimum date on the date picker. We do not want people to set an event yesterday, right? Unless you go back to the future, but we don't have the time machine yet, right? Amini, you building the time machine? All right. Until then, we cannot go back in time. So here, our minimum date for the event is today's date. Okay? So this is the user is not allowed to set an event prior to today's date. That's when it first comes on screen. That's where you do your setup logic. Remember the view lifecycle? When the app first runs, my view comes on screen. It sets everything. Like it configures all requirements. It configures my date picker, very similar to our stepper last week. We configure the stepper, the segmented control. This is where you configure the viewed load. Is where you configure our viewed load. Is where you configure startup logic. The default for the picker should be minimum today. That's where we set it. Yes?
What if we were going to do a custom specific minimum date?
We will get into specific date configuration later, right? Where you could have a calendar event specifically creating a specific calendar date. We'll come into that, where we talk about calendar, the calendar object. Cool? But for now, this is defaults to today as the minimum. So if the user tries to go back to yesterday, the picker will actually fall back to today's date. We'll actually see what that looks like. Actually, we could test it out right now. So first off, comment out that code. If you've typed out the date picker minimum date, comment it out. Run your app. Run your app. Let's see what's actually happening there with that line of code. So run your application. Run your application. Make sure date picker minimum date is commented out. So currently, we could go back to days before, correct? Can we scroll on our picker view and go to a prior date?
Yeah.
Cassandra, can we? Sering, can we scroll on our calendar a previous date? And the date stays there, right? Currently, I have October 15th. I cannot create an event October 15th, 2019. That date has passed already. That date has passed already. So I want on my picker view, I do not want the user to be able to set an event October 15th, 2019. Everybody with me? So what do I do? In code, in our viewed load, let's go back to line 44. I uncomment out where it says date picker, minimum date. I run my code again. And let's see if we could set a calendar event for October 15th. So let's go back to date picker, minimum date here. Run the app again. Can we go to October 15th? Let's see. I go to September 9th. See what happens. It goes back to today. Everybody? It's going to come back to today's date. Okay? The spinner will come back to today's date. So right now, the user cannot, with our UI, set an event prior to today. So far, so good? Any questions about that? And we did that based on the minimum date there. We set the minimum date to today's date. Okay? Okay, cool. So now we have an event. We could go to our prepare for Segue. Did everybody type out your viewed load code? We have three statements here. We have the event we created here. We set our delegate, and we set the minimum date for the date picker. May? Good? All right, let's continue to our prepare for Segue. Here is where we want to set up and pass the event data to the detailed view controller. Great, so let's do that. First off, we need to get an instance of the detailed view controller. right? We need to get an instance of the detail view controller. Cool. How do we do that? We do that using a guard statement. Why? Because it's going to be optional. So here we have detail view controller. Here is where we really have to pay attention and ask all the questions we need to. So I need to get an instance of my detail view controller. My detail view controller is where I am about to go to. The detail view controller is where we are transitioning to, right? How do I get access to that? Anybody remember from a couple of days ago? How do I get access to that detail view controller? Cameron.
Segue, property has a property called destination.
Everybody heard Cameron? So Cameron says our Segue object here. Everybody see Segue in the function prepare for Segue? Do we see the Segue property? Right? So we have access to the Segue. The Segue is that thing that connects A to B. That object, that data type. It is a data type. It is a data type of UI storyboard Segue. It's a storyboard Segue. It's a connection. The connection that we did from our button, if we go back to our storyboard, that connection we did, that visual connection that we did, this here is a UI storyboard Segue. Do we see it? We connected, sorry, not that one, this one here. This here is the Segue that we connected from our button to our second view controller. Julia, this is a UI storyboard Segue. So we have access to it in code. If we go back to our create event view controller, this Segue is that Segue we have in storyboard. Everybody see it? So on that Segue, I know my source, where I'm coming from, and I know my destination, where I'm going. Everybody, very important. So the Segue is that connection between A and B. And the Segue has a destination. It also has a source. Okay? But here, we're interested in where we're going to. That's why we use destination. Source is where I'm coming from. Destination is where I'm going to. Okay? So we could write that in. So Segue dot source is where the Segue is coming from. Segue dot destination is where the Segue is going to. Okay? Cool. So now we have destination, but this is not enough because right now our detail view controller, if we option click on it, well, we can't, let's complete the code and get rid of the errors, and then we'll option click. If I option click on my detail view controller, is it a detail view controller? One second. Let's actually redo this so we know what's happening. Update your code such that it looks like mine right now. If I option click on my detail view controller, Jahid, what type is detail view controller? Is it a detail view controller? Option click on detail view controller. It's a UI view controller. It's the parent of the view controller, of the detail view controller. This does not have an event, right? I cannot say detail view controller dot event. It doesn't exist. Everybody, our detail view controller has an event property, correct? We created it, correct? We need to get access to that event, right? So we need to typecast it to a detail view controller. Typecasting meaning the detail view controller needs to be a detail view controller, not a UI view controller. Everybody with me? Currently, we have a UI view controller here. This is a UI view controller, right? The detail view controller here. Do we agree? Right. On our detail view controller, which we created, if we go to our detail view controller here, we have an event property, which is public. We should be able to access it, correct? But we cannot access it on the parent. The parent doesn't know, this UI view controller doesn't know about an event. So we have to typecast it, comment out this code here, comment out this code on line 58. We need to use typecasting to typecast it to the object that we expect it to be, which is detail view controller. No, generically, meaning the Segue destination only knows about the UI view controller. It doesn't know about the subclass. Okay? That destination returns you a UI view controller. So we have to go one step further. We have to typecast it to that view controller we expect. So here we're going to use typecasting to say let detail view controller equal to segue dot destination as typecasting back from unit 1 as we downcast it to the type we expect. What type do we expect? Detail. Thank you, Mr. Sering. This is the type we expect. Action click on it now, Sering. What type is it? What type is detail view controller? Action click, everybody, on detail view controller now. What type is it now? It's a detail view controller, right? So if we option click on detail view controller, and I zoom in here, now it's a detail view controller. This is what we want. Everybody, this is what we want. This is what we're after. This is how we could set detail view controller dot event on our destination. Okay? Any questions before we move on? So now we could set the event on the detail view controller. How do we do that? We say detail view controller dot event equal to our event. Right? So now we've successfully set the event. Here we've successfully set our detail view controller's event. The destination where we're going to now has an event. Right? So without doing those lines of code here, there's no way for our detail view controller event to be set. We need to use prepare for segue. We need to use prepare for segue, override prepare for segue, and we need to go ahead and typecast it to the type we expect. Now we have the detail view controller, and we could say detail view controller dot event equal to the event object that we created up here. Okay? Mel, question? Okay. Any questions before we move on? Any questions before we move on? Downcast it to the type we expect. This is downcasting. You change the type to the type you expect. The parent was a UI view controller. This is not what we wanted. We want the child, the subclass of that UI view controller, which is a detail view controller. That's the type we expect. That type has a property on it called event. Okay?
So now, in order for it to display what exactly that feature is doing, right? Would we connect those labels?
Yeah, we need to connect. So you fast forward in, right? We're still trying to understand prepare for segue. But fast forward into your question, yes, on the detail view controller, you have the event now. You could set the UI, the outlets there.
And which would set it on the detail.
Yes, on the detail view controller. All right. Any questions before we move on past prepare for Segue? This is the prepare for Segue. This is a very important function. This function, we should know what's going on there. Yes, question, sir. View did load, we have 3 lines here. We have our event we set to a default value. We have our event delegate we set to self. And we have our picker view, we set minimum date to the current date, today. Tony? All right, cool. So any questions for prepare for Segue before we move on? Any other questions for prepare for Segue? Okay. Cool. So before we move on to our create event view controller, our detailed view controller, we need to capture what the user entered into the text field. When the user enters some event here, we need to get that name and set it to the current event, right? So when I press in enter, so I put in demo, for example, I put in demo meeting. I put in demo meeting, right? And I put return. When I click on return, I want to update the event name. When I click on return, I want to update the event name. Where do we do that? We do it in the text should return. So let's go to text should return here and update our event name. We have an event, so let's say event.name. I'm in the text should return. Event.name is event text field dot text it's an optional, so I use nil coalescent to unwrap it. Cool. We entered that one line. And one more line on the date change here. So when the user edits the date, we also want to update the date. Update the date in our date picker changed to sender. Sender is the date picker. It has a property on it called date. So make sure you have those 2 lines so our actual event updates. So here we are updating the events date, and over here we are updating the event's name. Cool? So far so good? Can we continue? Still typing? Continue? Where are you, Shania? So we have 2 updates. One on date picker changed. Event.date is sender.date. This is the picker. And the second edit was event name in the text field should return. We updating the name of the event when the user clicks the return key on the keyboard. Cool? All right. Can we continue? Okay, cool. So we have all that information. Our Segue code is ready. Let's go to our create event view controller to update the UI. What's that, sir? Scroll down. You got it? Cool. All right, so create event. This is create. Let's go to create, detail view. We are going to detail view controller. We only have 1 line of code so far. We have to do more updates here. We also have outlets we need to add. So here, let's go ahead and add our outlets. We'll first type it in code. So here we have our outlets and properties. So we'll type out the outlets and then we'll connect them from our view controller to our storyboard. So our first outlet, we have a message label. Message label is of type UI label, exclamation mark. Second outlet, we have a selected date label. Which is UI label. And our third outlet, we have the switch control. We want to know if it's on or off. Switch control is of type UI switch. Again, we'll connect that using our storyboard. We'll have a function, we'll call it update UI. The function's responsibility is basically to update our UI elements here. We drag it from view controller to storyboard. That's what we'll be doing after.
I know, but like how do you do it to where when you go to storyboard and you drag it?
Yeah.
There's no way to do it from the new controller? You have to do it manually?
No, you could do it. You could do it the other way. You could do it both ways. You could go from storyboard to view controller. You could go from view controller to storyboard. Make sure that your view controller scene class changes. Make sure you change the class there. If you don't change the class, you won't be able to control drag from it. We'll get to that point, Tiffany. We're not there yet, right? Cool. So update UI. What does update UI look like? Update UI, again, we'll use a guard statement here to capture the date of the event because our event is an optional. Our event is an optional here. What's our event? Our event is an optional. So we need to use optional unwrapping. So event.date. We need to get the date. Then we have selected label dot text equal to, I'll come back to this. Let's just put a comment here. We need to do more code. Next, we have the switch control. Switch control is on. Basically, we're going to toggle the switch control. If the user said no, the switch should be off. So if the user will attend the event, if they will attend the event, right? So based on the Boolean value for will attend, we set our is on. Again, the values are true or false. True or false. For is on, the values are either true or false. Based on the event, we set the switch based on the event. So set switch position based on value of will attend, true or false. If true, switch will be turned on, else switch will be turned off. And lastly, we have one more element. We have the message label. Event name for the message label. If it's nil, we'll just say event name not available. At this point, it should have a value because we set it in prepare for Segue. Available. I want us to test this first before I talk about date formatter. So when we're ready, we'll run our code and test if well, first of all, we need to call update UI, sorry. Make sure you call update UI in VideoLoad. Yes, question?
Sorry, where was the prepare segue located then?
You're in the create event. Our prepare for Segue is from the source. It has to be in create event view controller. Oh, we need to wire up our outlets. Go to storyboard, sorry. Go to storyboard. Go to storyboard. Make sure you have your second view controller open here. Click on your second view controller. I don't think we've wired that up. How do I change the class for my second view controller? How do I change the class for the second view controller? Identity inspector, and we change the class, correct? What's our class name? Detail view controller. I press enter. Okay. Let me make sure you guys have all your code. Make sure you set the class so that your detail view controller comes up. And to set the class, go ahead. Click on the view controller for the new view controller. Click on that bar here. Click on the bar. Go to Identity Inspector. Identity Inspector. And then Detail View Controller and press enter. Anybody still needs help setting up the class? Amelie, what's your question? If it's not changing, click on your first view controller and click back on your second view controller. Everybody? Everybody? Any questions? Okay, cool. So we have 3 outlets. Let's go ahead and connect those. So my message label, go ahead and drag it out to message label here. Right? Message label goes to the first label. Everybody? Message label goes to the first label. My selected date label goes to my date of event label. Yes? And my switch control goes to my switch control. While we're here, let's add one more action. Add one more action below our update UI, the action for the switch. Control drag from your switch to your view controller. And simply add RSVP changed. RSVP changed and press enter. Or say that again. I missed your question. The update UI function, make sure you call it in VideoLoad. No, it doesn't matter where you put your RSVP changed function. Right? Just make sure you put it after VideoLoad. Cool? All right. Yes.
In order to get my new view, my
In order to get the assistant showing up?
no, in order to get my new phone, because technically when I press the previews, right, it already takes me to my creative editing control. When I press this new controller, oh, never mind.
Okay, cool. I like when you answer questions. Let's run the app and see where we are. Question, Marjet. It's not letting you create an action. Make sure that you drag in outside of your update UI method. So the action for RSVP changed. Make sure you add it outside of the update UI function. Run your app. Let's see what we have so far. We've done a lot of code. We haven't run the app yet. Not good. Let's run the app and see what we have so far. Run the app. Let's see what we have so far. Tony. So run the app, see what we have so far. What you want to see? Up here? For people where the simulator is running, edit your text field and see if it changes when you segue over. My simulator is hungry for lunch, looks like. What's that? No? Yeah, Xcode. We need better machines. Anybody got the simulator to run yet? Because mine is just taking a bit of time here. Unable to load. Were you able to create an event and segue over? We haven't done the date. Remember, we haven't done the date. The name did not change. Did you call update UI? Make sure you call update UI. Make sure you call update UI in UIDateLoad. Anybody got the name to change as you segue? A mini, right? We getting hands here, right? Very good, very good. The update UI should be in UIDateLoad, yes. Update UI should get called in UIDateLoad.